is BRI in some ways another form of string of pearls? Should sort of, and sort of what would, or sort of, how does India look at the military defense dimension of BRI?
Okay, maybe John can take this first.
Okay. I was hoping to ride on your back, but I'll try my best. When it comes to first, I'll talk about string of pearls in a minute. But when it comes to military ports in East Asia and the Pacific, to me, in terms of what China's trying to create, it's not that difficult to understand. It's essentially what Imperial Japan tried to achieve, a few decades ago, in terms of the location of ports, military ports, and so on. Now, where the BRI comes in, and this is where, I've used the term the Djibouti example. And what China tends to do is say, all right, first of all, we'll start up a civilian port, and then they invest more in the logistics of it. And then they invest more in running the logistics of it. Then they invest more in related infrastructure that links it, and so on and so on. So eventually you have this mission creep. And before you know it, you actually have a military grade facility. Eventually then you have Chinese military troops in there to guard military interests or guard against piracy. And then you end up with Djibouti, where it's basically a military port. So from that point of view, I feel that the BRI, yes, it is a string of pearls, or it is designed to give military effect to the so-called string of pearls through that economic avenue. But I should also note, when we talk to BRI, we have to always remember that, look, the BRI is real, but it's also an enormously hyped brand. China calls everything it does as part of the BRI. So from an analytical point of view, I think we have to be careful about sort of beginning the BRI as the basis upon which everything that China wants to achieve strategically and militarily begins.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with everything that John has said. The ports start off as dual-use ports. But they can, of course, be converted for semi-military or even for military purposes. Now, that having been said, whether it is Chok Fu in Myanmar or Hambantota in Sri Lanka or Ream in Cambodia, the question is, do the Chinese need that many bases in the region to enforce an Indian Ocean presence? My own sense is, if you look at the way they're developing their naval capabilities, of course, they need places to turn around ships and so on and so forth. But they don't necessarily need a string of pearls to do so. They have Djibouti. Gwadar, we can presume, will become a naval base, because really it makes no sense from the trade perspective, since Karachi port itself is underutilized. So, it's absurd to believe they will drive goods down from the 20,000 foot Himalayas to the sea. But I think if you look at the aircraft carrier groups they are forming, if you look at the Marine Corps they're establishing, if you look at the supply ships that they've launched, the Chinese can actually sustain a permanent presence in the Indian Ocean by 2030 without necessarily building these ports. There's one aspect, however, which we ought to look at, and that is that the weaponization of infrastructure is not only military. For instance, if you can control civilian ports, you can actually control the flow of trade in and out of that. All you have to do is delay the entry of an Indian ship into that port, or a Japanese ship or an American ship, by 2 days. And the leverage you get in terms of economic benefit is enough. So you don't necessarily have to put a submarine there. Now, that the Chinese are certainly doing. What they're essentially doing is weaponizing BRI projects in order to gain maximum diplomatic and strategic space, whether it is in a particular country or in the region around that. And that's really what we have to be careful of. So, for instance, BRI projects in Europe, there's no military content to it. But the objective of a BRI project is to ensure that the European Union splits, or that they create enough fissures within the European Union to prevent, say, the EU taking a unified policy on Tibet or on Xinjiang, or on global business practices which are not in keeping with global rules, IPR and so on. So these are also strategic objectives of BRI, not necessarily military, but strategic.